So again, my name is Lionel Bergeron. I work with New York City's Department of Education. I am going to, okay. I primarily work with the Computer Science for All team, focused on elementary school computer science education. I was part of the team when it got started about 6.5, almost 7 years ago. And so today's session, we're just going to do a little introduction to what elementary school or K-5 computer science is looking like in New York City, and how it supports the New York State standards, and the New York State standards are supporting the work we're doing, as well as how it's tied into the bigger goals of New York City public school system. So just a couple of objectives, general professional learning strategies. You're going to gain a better understanding of how the New York City Department of Education is implementing the state standards for computer science and digital fluency. Also gain a better understanding of how implement the standards in that K-5 classroom for computer science, and also able to share the information you learned today with your students, coworkers, and parents. I think something that happened, something that was mentioned in the opening presentation this morning, talking about, I hope that you walk away with something from this session today that you can either share with your coworkers, your students, or the parents that you work with. We're going to start off with a quick icebreaker, go over a little bit of the standards review, which I'm sure most of you know, how they tie into the work that we're doing in New York City, and then the Computer Science for All NYC meaningful experiences, and how they connect to the content that we're using in our state, in our city. It is going to be a lot of information, so I will try to keep track of the chat, but please do ask any questions, and if there's time at the end, I'll definitely try to get to that too. So just a quick icebreaker. So if we're looking at this emoji story, what do you think this emoji story is trying to tell you? So just take 30 seconds and looking at the emojis, what am I trying to convey with this particular emoji story? Snow day. Yeah. Oh, I didn't even think of that. Yes. Okay. What else? What comes to mind when you look at this? It's awful, but turn the front upside down, right? When it snows, it's awful. Turn that front upside down, right? With the right clothing, snow can be fun. Yeah. Lives in the West Valley. Yeah. Okay. Making the best of a situation. The moodiness of children. Yes. These are some wonderful teacher answers here. Make lemonade. Absolutely. So snow day. Yeah. I like that it's a snow day. I didn't even think of it. It's cold. Need to wear warm weathers to go sledding and skiing and build a snowman. It was fun. Great. So what this emoji storytelling activity, it's where students create a story using emojis to describe a situation where they use this strategy to help manage how they were feeling. So when we think about emojis, they're images like faces, weather, food, animals, and activities we use in text messages, in email, and online. And we use them all over the place. So emojis are a way to share our feelings, like show humor, affection in our messages. And they've turned into their own creative language of their own, especially with the use of mobile devices and text messaging and different things like that. This particular activity is an adaptation from the Emoji Time play activity from the Hello Ruby series. If you're not familiar with Hello Ruby, it's a great book series that their website incorporates a lot of wonderful activities to do with elementary school students around computational thinking, computer science, and they have actually added some additional math content too, which ties directly to it, which is great. So, so when we think about that, when we're thinking about this, like, what is the strategy that I'm trying to represent here? And I think some of you got was that when it starts to snow, it's cold and I can get upset. But if I put on the right clothes and put on warmer clothes, I feel better. And then I want to go do some fun snow activities, which makes me happy. And so what this is doing is that we're using emojis to convey a certain feeling or a strategy that we use when we might be upset or just have to manage how we're feeling in our emotions, and then what the results might be. Emojis are also a really fun way just to convey new ideas and and information. So I saw this one time at a children's party where it was using emojis to describe your favorite story or book. So, for example, Green Eggs and Ham, the one that was there was The Very Hungry Caterpillar. So it's just a way of students thinking about how they might express themselves differently using different forms. And so what does this have to do with computer science and digital fluency standards, right? Or just computer science education or computational thinking in general? So this is why we're going to do a quick review of the standards and tie it into this activity, because I think this is a really important way to think about elementary school computer science, because for the standards, there's a lot of standards. Elementary school teachers don't always have the opportunity to teach computer science explicitly, so we have to look at ways of integrating into the work we might already be doing. And this is an example of that. So as you might know, the computer science and digital fluency learning standards are set up into 5 concepts: impacts of computing, computational thinking, networks and system design, cybersecurity, and digital literacy. And each one of those has their own sub-concepts and then aligning standards. There was a shift in the grade bands. Initially, it was a K2, 3, 5. But they moved it to a K1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, really with that addition of the K1 standard in order to address the needs of early learners and early childhood development for our kindergarten and first grade students, which I think is a really great idea and something very unique around the standards for New York State. And each one of those grade bands has a standard identifier, the standard itself, and its clarifying statement. So, and how can we use those when building out the work we're doing with our elementary school students? So we're going to take a look and make those connections with the concepts and sub-concepts. So the first concept being impacts of computing. It promotes an understanding of the evolving impacts of computing, technology, and society through many lenses, including personal, social, cultural, accessibility, legal, economic, and ethical. I think one of the challenges initially with getting teachers on board in elementary school around certain standards is that the way that they're written can sometimes make it feel like they're not for elementary or our younger students. But they really are if we break them down into an understanding of what they're meant to be. And so the sub-concepts for impacts of computing are society, ethics, accessibility, and career paths. And so when we look at this, we think about the impact of computing, right? Yeah, it takes a lot of work, right? And so if we think about that emoji story activity, what are some possible connections to the impacts of computing for this particular activity? How can this activity help us build the students' understanding of the impacts of computing? And I kind of touched upon it a little bit when describing the actual activity. Just go ahead and share your thoughts in the chat. Sequencing, right. Okay, perfect. Patterns, right. Using computer icons to communicate across languages, right. Now, some of you are already giving some, like sequencing and patterns aren't necessarily the impacts of computing. It might be tied in directly to one of the other standards. It does tie directly into one of the other standards. But when you think about impacts of computing, like how to navigate a computer, right. Good. Modes of communication. How has technology changed the way that we communicate with each other? Creative thinking. So when we look at some of the standards, the society standards for 2.3, it says, identify and analyze how computing technology has changed the way people live and work. So that's really thinking about how has technology changed the way that we communicate with each other. I know I have nieces and nephews at ages from 17 to 6 now, and some of the older ones, when they send me text messages, there's barely a word in there. It's a lot of it is just emojis or like fire and things like that. And then I have to text back. I'm like, I don't really understand what you meant. Can you help me understand that a little bit? So, but it's impacted the way that we communicate. Because not only can we communicate through our phones now, we communicate. I get emails with people adding emojis. People are putting emojis right here in the chat, right? And they're conveying how they're feeling or their reaction to the session. So I appreciate that too. So, So when we think about computational thinking as a second concept, this promotes a development of the fundamental skills, knowledge, and experience to solve problems by creating solutions using computational thinking concepts and practices. And this is where some of you had already touched on it with the previous slide, or the previous question was modeling, simulation, data analysis, visualization, abstraction, decomposition, algorithm, and programming. So some of you were talking about pattern recognition. So when we think about this activity, pattern recognition, sequencing, programming, like navigating a program, are there any other ways that this activity could help us with the idea of computational thinking and helping students better understand what computational thinking is, or one of the sub-concepts? Any other ideas around that? I always enjoy the virtual sessions because you got to give that moment to pause, but then it gets so silent in my house. So follow from left to right of an algorithm, right? Good. Decomposition into individual emojis, abstracting the greater meaning of the string of emojis, right? Yeah. Great example, Will. And that's, I think, one of the things is that when we identify the essential details needed to perform a general task in different settings or situations, right? So the task itself is like communicating an emotion and how we manage that emotion to change how we were feeling. That can be a paragraph. If you're writing it in words, it could be a paragraph, a page, but we need to just break it down into basic symbols using the emojis. So we're using decomposition, we're using abstraction, and that helps students understand to kind of get to the specifics or the core part of it. You're also, when talking about looking at a larger problem and breaking it down into smaller problems, this is a way of referencing that. I mean, like talking to students, like, listen, we need to break this big problem down into smaller parts, right? Remember when you told the story about how you were feeling and we broke it down into the smaller parts, the emojis? That's what I want you to do with this problem. And that's where this emoji activity allows that opportunity with your students. Next, the networks and system design standards aim to prepare students to understand the basic functions of the computing system and networks that are used as fundamental tools in our personal and professional lives. So now we're looking at hardware and software, networks and the internet. And this can be sometimes intimidating to adults, never mind younger students, because we don't always understand the relationship between hardware and software, or what networks and the internets are, what networks and the internet is. So this is a really important standard to think about when working with our students. So what are some possible connections between the emoji story activity and these standards? What do you think? And I think somebody kind of mentioned this earlier too, with the idea of just navigating a program. All right, give you one more second, just see if anyone has any thoughts or ways to share. This is definitely a harder one to think about. I think, yeah, and you know what? There's also the hardware and the software. So multiple steps to complete a task, right? Yeah, definitely. And so describe and demonstrate several ways a computer program can receive data, instructions, input, and present the resulting outputs. So this might be a little more complex in, with the emojis, but thinking about, sometimes autofill, right? Like when you're typing happy and your keyboard shows you one of the emojis to represent how you're feeling, right? Also, how we use keyboards, right? So in the past, before we had digital or virtual keyboards, how could we put emojis into the things that we were typing, right? If we had a regular keyboard, a QWERTY keyboard, there is an emoji button on there, right? So how has that changed over time? And so hardware has changed where we don't always use a physical keyboard. Now we use virtual keyboards that allow for a button for emojis. In the past, if we wanted to do a smiley face, what do we have to do in order to show somebody a smiley face? Anybody want to? Yep, exactly. Right. So old school smiley face, right? So the semicolon, and then I can never remember, colon, parenthesis or semicolon parenthesis. The other one's the winky face. Yeah, equal sign, the letter D. Yeah. So think about how we've changed with our hardware and software and the availability of emojis. Think about what Apple does now with our Memojis, right? Or when we send text messages that are animated emojis and things like that. And that's a way of introducing that idea of like hardware and software with students. Great. I really appreciate everybody's sharing, you know. What's the B? B. Okay, I kind of see it now. Yeah, that's great. And then we think about cybersecurity. The standards prepare students to understand why data and computing resources need to be protected, who might access them, why they might do so, whether intentionally or malicious or not. It's important for students to also understand how to employ basic safeguards to protect data and computing resources and how to appropriately respond to if a breach occurs, right? And so we have risks, safeguards, and responses. Now, this, again, is similar, can be a little bit of a challenge with students, right? In early elementary, you know, getting them to understand what cybersecurity is other than, you know, hearing it out there in the ether, which I'm sure they're familiar with, but do they really understand what it means? So what are some possible connections between the activity and the cybersecurity standards for elementary school, if you're familiar with them or not? Think about what you were doing when I asked you to like tell me what the story was telling. What were you doing? Sharing, okay. Okay, sharing personal information. Yeah. So, you know, we don't want to put addresses in the information, right? Yeah. Decoding and encoding. Right. Thank you, Mary Beth. Yeah. So the standards for 2.3 for this particular one for safeguards is encode and decode a short message or phrase. Also, even with the kindergarten, first grade, decode a word or short message using a simple code. And so we don't always have, with elementary school students, you know, we don't always have to use programming, you know, or software. We can use things like emojis, these unplugged or pseudocode, right? Because that helps students better understand what is block-based programming versus text-based programming. It's a variation of the same thing, right? And so the activity helps with that decoding and encoding. And as mentioned in the opening remarks, you know, it is Cybersecurity Week. So maybe trying this out with your students, just giving them a code each day next week and see if they can decode it using emojis or you know, binary lettering, things like that. If you think of code.org's binary bracelet, it's the same thing, decoding and encoding. Cyber.org actually has some really great activities for upper elementary students with that too. So. And then finally, we have digital literacy, which refers to the ability to leverage computer technology to appropriately access digital information, to create, share, and modify artifacts, and to interact and collaborate with others. So we have digital use and digital citizenship, right? And it's an interesting conversation to have around our state standards and like, well, why is computer science and digital literacy or digital fluency together? And it's because they're codependent. They support one another. A better understanding of computer science helps you become more digitally fluent, right? And a better understanding of digital fluency helps you access computer science better. So these things are codependent and they support one another. And it's a really valuable tool and, you know, in digital literacy to have in order to better understand what you're doing in computer science. And so what are some possible digital literacy connections to the emoji story, especially thinking about digital use and digital citizenship? Use of a keyboard? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What I really like about this particular one, because it also allows for accessibility, it read code. It allows for accessibility because students that might have trouble communicating how they're feeling might find it easier using technology to, you know, emojis to exactly social emotional learning to better communicate how they're feeling using an emoji, right? Because they might not always know how to speak how they're feeling. I know I was a middle school teacher, special ed computer lab, and students were always mad. But when you really kind of like, you know, whittled down and like got to the core of it, they could be disappointed, they could be sad, but they always refer to it as mad, you know. And so having them build out that better understanding of how they can express themselves using digital literacy or technology. So Great. Open different applications and multitasking. Right. Yeah. Great. And, so communicate and work with others using digital tools to share knowledge and convey ideas, right? So we're conveying an idea of a story, working with others to retell a story using emoji. So that is a component of digital literacy, right? Great. So how does this apply to what we're doing in New York City with the Department of Education and computer science in the elementary school level? So the New York State standards, the first thing that we wanted to do is identify like what the values were for the state when developing these standards. And, pulling out some key points was that there was a belief that technology, knowledge, and skills are vital for full participation in 21st century life, which is absolutely 100% true. And we often relied on, ISTE standards or the CSTA standards, which were very informative. But as teachers in New York State, we needed something that was specific to what we were doing here in the state. It was also part to comply with a law in 2018 requiring the development of the New York State computer science standards. And then also to fill an expectation outlined in 2010, University of State of New York statewide technology plan, which said student, teachers, leaders will have clear standards for what students should know and be able to do with technology, right? So it allows and guides us and really anchors the work that we're doing in computer science. So it's no longer just seen as a club or seen as an activity to do for fun at the end of, for like free time. I know we're not supposed to say free time, for choice time, that there is academic value and importance in computer science and digital fluency. And so these standards help really ground that work. And so every student will know how to live productively and safely in a technology-dominated world. This includes understanding the essential features of digital technologies, why and how they work, and how to communicate and create using the technology. So when we talk about things like, not giving away too much information, personal information, whether it's in schoolwork or whether it's not in schoolwork, like if our students are in TikTok and they're, talking about, their home address or they're giving away personal information, it's important for them to understand the risks at that, and then also just in general, a better understanding of technology as they move forward in developing their own interests in careers or, just passions or things that they want to do. So for New York City, we took that information from the standards and the vision of the standards and made it our own for New York City. And so this also, the New York State Computer Science for All initiative started prior to the standards. And we had built out a wonderful platform called the New York City Blueprint to support that academic need of our teachers. And once the standards became available, we were able to combine the two of them to make a really powerful vision for what we're looking for in New York City when teaching computer science. And that is that all students will graduate from New York City public schools with durable skill foundation in computational thinking and computer science that will empower them to thrive in an ever-evolving digital and tech-dependent world. And we all know, especially computer science, thank you, Will. We all know this in teaching that, there's a new technology tool every week. Every month there's something else that comes out or there's an update. I'm cautiously waiting to update my phone to the next iOS 16 because I just don't know what's going to happen, and so, but my own understanding of computational and computer science makes me confident in that I could figure it out. And that's really what's meant behind teaching students, especially in the earlier ages, of what computer science and computational thinking is that like, okay, there's going to be this change in technology, but based off of my learnings, I can manage this change and I can manage this new technology or this new software, this new hardware. And so these skills will also help create pathways to rewarding careers and long-term economic security, which will equip young people to be a positive force for change in our communities and our school. And this is something that's evolved over the last couple of years, especially with our new mayor and chancellor. And, it's sometimes when computer science for all first started, there was emphasis on the number of jobs that will be available in the future related to technology, right? Which is very important. But we also wanted to make sure that students still gain that creative computing understanding of computer science. And I think this challenge from our mayor and chancellor is a really perfect way of like combining these things, because what it makes me think about is that hierarchy of needs, right? And so when you think about the idea that positive force for change, they first have to, students have to have a career and long-term economic security. And that you see that right there in the second to the bottom, right? Where personal security, employment, resources, health, property, because then it allows them to, have that feeling of belonging, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, and then a desire to become the most that one can be and really contribute to their communities, whether it's their family, their school, their neighborhood, or the world, right? And so I think this, statement from the vision for New York City, it really kind of embraces that idea that we really want to give students the power and the tools so they can contribute to their communities. And so every New York City public school will provide computational thinking and computer science experiences to all students with explicit outreach to Black and Latinx students and students who identify as girls who are traditionally underrepresented in the STEM fields, right? And in order to do that, students will be able to understand essential features of computing technology, why computing technologies exist, and how it works. And you can see just how it informed our expectations are by the state standards. Use technology as a tool for self-expression to advocate for themselves and others. So again, you think about that emoji one, self-expression, right? Not just problem solving, but expressing ideas, expressing the things that drive or the passions of our students. Manipulate, develop, apply technology-based solutions to real-world problems using a computational thinking lens. And then finally, critically examine CS systems and structures and use CS as a tool for social justice. So we have an amazing equity team on Computer Science for All, and they inform the work that we do across the group. And they really, the teachers are really the driving force behind that. The ingenuity team is going to be speaking a little bit later today. And the ideas they come up with and the work that they're doing with their students to really critically think. And this is happening in elementary school. Gwen White is going to be on that board or that panel. And she's just done some amazing things to really have her students think critically using computer science, and it's just amazing. And I'm just honored to work with these teachers in New York City. And so the last part here, and we're going to kind of jump into some more content stuff and things that you can walk away with, is that so that at the end of the K-12 journey, students will fully understand how computing technology impacts their lives, their families, and their world. And so in order to do that, we developed a set of statements of what the K1, 2, 3, and 4, 6 student experiences look like. We also have middle school and high school, which I can share out a little bit later. But we're just going to focus primarily on what those student experiences are for K1, 2, 3, and 4, 6, and then how it ties into our curriculum and some of the work we're doing. So when we think about the K1 statement, just kind of pulling out a couple of pieces here, students will begin to explore the basic fundamentals of computer science through activities and lessons designed to be implemented without using computing devices. So now, it's not to say K1 should not use computers or computing devices or technology. That's not what it's saying. It's saying that unplugged or non-device specific activities are a really great way to engage our students in it to help build that fundamental understanding. And they'll also learn the relationship between hardware, software, and other roles that computers have in their daily lives. And an example of that here in New York City is a unit we call craft computing. So the craft computing unit is something that we developed with one of our partner organizations here in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, Galen and Yadira and their 2 wonderful children. They've been working with us for a little while now, 6 years. And they've just really come up with some amazing ways to engage our students. And this particular activity that we were working on with them initially started off with just students creating CPUs and circuit boards using arts and crafts materials, right? But then it built out into a unit. And so the craft computing unit is an opportunity for students to gain that better understanding of what makes a computer using arts and crafts materials. They get a good concept of what students can, or what computers can and can't do. The idea of what physical computing is, like how we actually interact with our computers, and how we could possibly interact with them in the future. So if we think about, you know, our phones use a keyboard, but then now they're touchscreen, and how has that changed and what might be next? And then also physical computing, it's an opportunity to design, create, build models and prototypes, game controllers, sensors, and simple machines. There's so much opportunity built into this unit. And so the actual unit, when we took those initial ideas that Sunset Spark came up with, we tied it first in directly to a book called Not a Box. So if you've read this book before, it's about a little rabbit that's exploring different boxes and what it is. And the narrator's like, why are you sitting in a box? And the rabbit's like, well, that's not a box. It's a race car. And it's really meant to, students can learn about physical computing through unplugged hands-on activities, but it's driven by the imagination of the students. So they can come up with whatever they want, and they're actually designing their own Not a Box. And so one of the activities from it is the circuit board. So, you know, they initially start off creating their own idea of what their Not a Box is, what it does, what its function is, and then they create their own CPU or processing unit, because it doesn't have to be a central processing unit. You can be it could be a happy processing unit for all we know. And then they take that processing unit and make it part of a larger circuit board. And they have different parts, and students gain a better understanding of what the hardware looks like inside of a computer. And then they create, using their imagination, even imaginary components of their own circuit board. And it comes from the original idea of their Not a Box and what that functionality is. And so you can start off with a simple piece of green paper. Green cardstock works really well because it has a little rigidity. It's a little rigid, so it's easier to use. And the students place their processing unit on there. The processing unit is an opportunity to teach things like symmetry or patterns, or, you know, pattern recognition, different things like that. And then they come up with their own components, or learn about components like transistors, resistors, wires, you know, other chips, things like that. And you can use simple shapes to do this. And then they build out their own circuit board, and then they make the connections. One of the fun craft ones is using glitter glue to make the wires, because it kind of shimmers and it almost demonstrates what electricity might look like going through the wires. And so here's an example of what you might, you know, like a standard idea of what an actual circuit board might look like. So you have little transistors and buttons and batteries and chips and things like that. But then it can be something more fun where you have your sunshine. So this circuit board is your Not a Box rainbow maker, right? And so, you know, you have a sun, you have a heart, you have different components to it. Yeah, definitely sparkly silver yarn or something like that. Absolutely will. So it can be fun and creative, and really you're still teaching the same thing of like that computers are, you know, made up of circuit boards, and they're magical, but they're not magic, right? That there's hardware in there. And then there's wonderful opportunities for integration that Sunset Spark came up with, like making that connection to the similar to systems inside our body. So like our digestive, nervous, computers need different parts to do different things. In addition, computers also have different systems that connect and work with each other. So, you know, our digestive system works with our circulatory system, that type of thing. You can also use programming languages or code to write instructions for the computer. So think about using emojis to create your program for your circuit board, or your Not a Box. You can create your own programming language for your Not a Box. And then students consider how human or animals use their senses to inspire their own creative sensors. So one of the activities in the craft computing is making sense of sensors, and the students create their own sensor for their Not a Box. So like, how is information going to go, or data going to be received or input to the Not a Box, and what kind of sensors can you come up with, or what sensors are already out there that we already use, like light sensors or sound and things like that. So that's an example of the K1 and the tie into our K1 student experience. Now, one thing to think about too is that the craft computing can also be 2, 3, 4, 5, but you might make it more dynamic using actual hardware like a makey or a microbit in order to incorporate actual programming and physical computing devices like microcontrollers. Excuse me. So when we go into the 2-3 student experience, some of the things that I want to kind of just draw out or focus on is like that transition from unplugged to block-based programming platforms and devices, right? And then as well as students will begin to build an understanding of the fundamental concepts of computer science to express those ideas and solve problems. And then finally, they begin to gain a broader perspective of the social impacts of computing on self and community. And I think that's something that we always want to talk about, how computer science, computers and computing devices impact our community and our society. But really, it's very important to start with that. How does it impact ourselves, right? How does it change or affect our own lives first? Because then we have a broader understanding later on. So this particular unit that we've been using here in New York City is called Coding with Feeling. And so that activity that we did at the icebreaker, the emoji story, is tied into this larger unit of study. And it asks the students, like, how have you used computer science to express an idea? Or have you used computer science to communicate how you're feeling? And so the Coding with Feeling activity or unit is designed to support those ideas. Again, wonderful partners, Sunset Park. Sunset Spark helped initially. This was built out of a robots and robotics activity we came up with, where students were challenged to pick feeling or emotion and then pick either a Sphero or a Dash robot and program it to express a particular feeling, and then see if other students could guess what that robot was expressing, which is actually just a lot of fun activity. It's wonderful to do during professional learning too. But from that activity, what we ended up doing is building out a whole unit that can be tied to social emotional learning content, where the activities support the understanding of computer science and computational thinking concepts. You know, taking those things of like decomposition, pattern recognition, generalization, students learn how to communicate feelings through different forms of expression. So if we went through the standards for that first activity and how they tie in to the activity itself. So this broader unit does the same thing. And what students end up doing is they create projects that help communicate a different feeling or emotion. And then finally, a second project, which helps to support other students in how they might be feeling. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So some of the examples for activities for this particular one is, students discuss how sometimes show feelings using facial expressions. And then what they do is they can get an array of different facial expressions. This example is emoji flashcards. We also have the Sans Harmony social emotional learning content in New York City, and they have an array too of faces. And what you want students to do is to really just look at an array. It can be 6, it could be 9, it could be 12, however you want. And what you do is you ask them, do they see? Yes, yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point, Ellen, and we can talk about that in just a second. So, and looking at the faces, do the students recognize any similarities or patterns? And from there, you ask them to sort the images into 2 or 3 groups, and they should be able to describe how they came up with the groups and provide a feeling word to label each group. For example, embarrassed, exhausted, and feeling down are all, they're not smiling. So they're not necessarily frowning, but they're not smiling. And so I'm going to group them together under the sad group. And so what I'm doing there is I'm doing pattern recognition, I'm doing grouping, and I'm also doing generalization, right? And so those are elements of computational thinking that we want our students to develop. And what you can then ask students to do is create their own version. Okay, so can you create your own version of a sad emoji? And there's a wonderful website called Flat Icons Emoji Maker where students can create their own. And if we think about, even the story that we were talking about before, students can create their own emoji feelings. And if you look at the bottom of this particular screen, it's the 4 steps, right? So every emoji can be created with those 4 categories. So you're generalizing again, and you're also creating an algorithm because you're saying, I'm going to start with step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So pick a face, pick eyes, pick a mouth, and then pick an accessory, right? And what you end up doing here is this is a perfect example of an algorithm and automation. You follow the same 4 steps every time to create different types of emojis, right? Yeah, and it's a lot of fun. I did this with my teachers over the summer, and a lot of them used it where students created emojis to represent themselves. But then also it's tied into that social emotional learning where students can create emojis to, you know, create their own feelings array on their tables, right? And that represents how they feel happy and how they see themselves as sad, right? One thing that you do want to notice here is that the poop icon is there. So you want to keep that in mind with your students when using it. Just remember that. So, okay, great. I'm glad that, you know, this is definitely something that people can find useful. And something that was brought up yesterday too, or 2 things that were brought up yesterday during some of the sessions and during the keynote speaker was that one of the things is that with the standards, you don't have to be like, oh my God, I've got to recreate what I'm doing. And this all ties back into the idea of like integration, the work that we're already doing with our students. How can we identify the components of computer science and digital literacy and then build from them in order to teach them the standards, right? So students love emojis. They play around with emojis. It's culturally responsive, sustainable education because we're looking at the culture of our students. But then really creating the idea of like, okay, this is how it works with decomposition and abstraction, right? So, and then the other thing is that the partners, right? Somebody said this yesterday that find partners. So CodeSpark, not CodeSpark, Sunset Spark has been an amazing partner. They've informed the work that we're doing. They come up with wonderful, engaging units. And, you know, they're just an amazing partner. So, and an example of that too is that we have the opportunity to work with the Scratch Education Collaborative this past school year. And one of the things we came up with is there was a presentation by Exploratorium during one of our sessions, and they had shared an activity by Hannick Piven where you animate a face or making faces. And we're kind of running out of time, so I just want to, you know, make sure I get to the last point here. But you take these random objects and you create a face, and the objects can be connected to something personal, you know, something that reflective of who you are, and you create a face. And from there, you decide like, well, how can I animate this face or for this particular unit, communicate a feeling? So if I wanted to take my face with these particular objects, how do I make it sad? Oh, I just turn the smile upside down, right? But then you can challenge students to go into using, and this is where we look at that transition from unplugged to text-based programming or programming itself. How can I animate it using Scratch Junior or Scratch? And so doing simple animations of like a smiley face to a frowny face. And so changing costumes. I've got 2 costumes here. So all I'm going to do is go into Scratch and change the costumes to animate it, right? You know, and then here's an example. I'll do it really quickly. So if I click on the sprite, it's just smiley face, click on the sprite, frowny face, right? And so it's a simple animation. But now we're moving away from that, you know, just unplugged to online activities where we're teaching them the coding and the programming. Using wonderful resources from Scratch, such as their tutorials around just simple animating a sprite that talks. You can do different types of things. I'm not going to go into every example because we're almost out of time. But adding sprites or changing the size, think about how those tutorials can be used to inform what the students are doing in their project. And what you want students to be like, I want to make something that shows excitement, so it's going to be bouncing around. All right, well, let's look at some of these tutorials and which ones can you learn from in order to do what you want to do, right? And yes, thanks, Monica. Also, she's sharing the scratch cards, which also help students. It's a wonderful way of teaching them too. So you don't even have to collect objects and take pictures of the objects. What you could do is you could just find the sprites that best represent who you are and then configure them into a face and then animate it. So there's a lot of really wonderful opportunities. Same with Scratch Junior. Just the drive across the city activity or run a race activity teaches students enough about movement in order to animate some kind of face or feelings in their own project. So a simple thing like this, you know, I'm just going to smiley face, frowny face, smiley face, frowny face. And I'm only using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blocks, right? 5 blocks to do this particular project. So communicating with code in the classroom, this is one of our wonderful teachers, Leslie Johnson, who did this with her students. It was tied into the mood meter, which they use in their classroom in order to, you know, express how they're feeling and for teachers to do social emotional learning check-ins. Students started by creating their own faces, and I was really impressed by the different types of feelings and emotion words that they created, just using simple materials. And there's a short little video in here with the student for English language learners or bilingual students being able to record their own voice to express how they're feeling. And so you think about that impact that, you know, giving students that might feel that they don't have a voice, giving them that voice. So again, opportunities for integration or social emotional learning, developing your expressive language to describe how you're feeling, or even in writing and storytelling. And they're often, a number of the lessons in this particular unit are kinesthetic, so students can practice fine and gross motor skills. So it engages students in that way. We know how all of our elementary schools love to jump up around and do all those fun things. Again, the presentation link, I know it's 10:26, so I don't want to keep going over. The one thing I do want to just, you know, because we're running a little late anyway, is that student experience related to 4-6. So this is an opportunity now to think about discussion and collaboration and working with each other and getting broader into the different code functions, right? Also recognize technology's impact on their school, and that idea of computing impact is important. So don't go yet, because I do want to show you this one last unit that we've been working on again. It's called Surfs Up Waves All Day, and incorporates the work of Gerald Lawson and his game design. Again, working with Sunset Park. You know, what this unit does is it takes that idea of waves, which one of the first games that Gerald Lawson had created was Surfs Up Waves All Day. And it takes that idea of waves and then incorporates other science elements such as electrical waves, sound waves, light waves. But they also learn the understanding principles of that lead to binary common sensors, wireless technology. And it's a longer perspective of computer science and how many different people and scientists' discoveries contributed to computer science. So now how do you access this? My slide deck is pinned at the top, and I think I still have it in my copy. Hold on, let me check. Yes, this is the slide deck. You can email me, and because as of right now, I do not have the units linked because we are transitioning from a one Google Drive to another Google Drive, and all the links are kind of messed up. So I need to update all that stuff. But you can email me and I can share those with you, or just keep this slide deck and I will update the slide deck with the resource page at the end. But the one thing, just to wrap this up, is so gaming history with Jerry Lawson. This focuses not only on the challenges of the technology that he was faced with and the limitations of the technology, but also like what, as being an African American, like what were the challenges that he had in the computer science and technology field. And so this is some of the adaptive work. And like I said, this is a unit we're still working on, because teachers are, when we talk about partnerships, they're one of the most amazing partners, are the teachers you work with. We gave this unit to them and what they could come up with. And they talked about how, Jerry Lawson's interest in technology and new technology drove the work he did in the game design. Talking about how cartridges really told the story because the animation or the actual the visuals of games back then was very limited. And each game had its own story. I didn't realize this, but Centipede has its own story tied into the Enchanted Forest. I had no idea this was part of the game design way back when, because all this stuff is now built into the stories. Like when you think about video games, it starts off with a narration and a talking, and there's like a cartoon basically built into it. I love this one, the adventure game cartridge, because it has a dragon or a sea serpent. And then now you actually see what the sea serpent looks like, that red duck looking character. And then so students, they turn and talk and they collaborate around their own ideas. And I think this is built into that vision for the upper elementary experience. And then they come up with their own game design. And so starting off with beginning, middle, and end. So you have storytelling components, designing their own cartridges. So you have elements of art or their own cabinets. I really love this activity from Sunset Spark that they did. It was just amazing. But then you can incorporate more advanced programming languages like Make Code Arcade, which allows you to switch between blocks and JavaScript. So I know that I ran through that last bit really quickly, but feel free to email me. I'd love to speak with anybody who's interested in learning more. We don't really have time for questions, but again, feel free to email me. It's on this last slide. I'll put the slide deck link in one more time. So yeah, great. Well, I hope you were able to walk away with something, even if it's just to make an emoji story with your students on Monday, or flat icon. And again, please feel free to reach out and let me know how I can better support you. So have a great day, everybody. Thanks, Tom. So what do I do, Tom? Just leave the room? I think you tried joining. Yep. Okay, great. Yeah, sorry it went over. So, all right.